The data annotations and the custom validation attribute and the self-validating model, those are all great for validation, but they're all server-side validations. These days, when we build web applications, we want to provide the user with instantaneous feedback, and that means we need some client-side script performing validations as the user is typing and tabbing between input text boxes. Fortunately, the MVC framework has supported this in the past, but with the MVC 3 release, client-side validation is even better. First of all, client-side validation is now unobtrusive. That means when I look at the HTML source produced by a rendered view, I will not see any JavaScript inside of that. All of the JavaScript is going to be in separate script file downloads that inject themselves into the page and look for specific attributes in the HTML to perform validation. I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. The other significant difference is that the only thing you need now for client-side validation is the jQuery library, the jQuery validation plugin, and another small jQuery validation plugin that Microsoft has implemented as an adapter between jQuery validation and MVC metadata. No more Microsoft Ajax libraries are needed for client-side validation. That's a significant download savings for some sites, because the Microsoft Ajax libraries were rather large, and to tell you the truth, in an MVC application, we made very little use of all the features that were in the Microsoft Ajax libraries. With MVC 3, you can do everything with pure jQuery. Somewhere in your view, or perhaps in your layout view, you'll just need to include the three pieces, jQuery, jQuery validate, and the jQuery.validate.unobtrusive. That's the Microsoft piece that acts as a shim between jQuery validate and the MVC metadata. The other significant piece to know about is that inside of your web.config, you can enable client-side validation and unobtrusive JavaScript by setting a couple app setting keys to true. These values will be true by default when you start a new MVC3 application from scratch, but if you're migrating an MVC2 application into MVC3, you might want to go in and enable these features. Inside of Visual Studio, I wanted to show you that the layout view for this application will include the jQuery script into every view that renders with this layout. And where does the jQuery script come from? Well, when you create a new MVC3 application, you'll find jQuery, jQuery.validate, jQuery UI, all of the scripts that you need, including the Microsoft Ajax scripts. They'll all be in your scripts folder by default. Inside of the create view, where we need validation support, we also have jQuery.validate and jQuery.validate.unobtrusive included. So all of the scripts are in place for client-side validation. I just need to come in and turn on client-side validation. I'm going to leave unobtrusive JavaScript enabled set to false for right now, just so we can see what the view looks like when this renders. Let's come into the create view and look at the page source. Obtrusive JavaScript is JavaScript that sticks out in the source code view. Everything that we're looking at here is JavaScript code and some JSON data that represents all of the metadata and information needed to perform validation on this view. We want to get rid of that. A lot of people that are concerned about page size and about search engine optimization, they don't want all of this inside of their views or in their rendered HTML. So let's turn on unobtrusive JavaScript and look at the create view again. This time when we look at the page source, there is no JSON payload. There's no JavaScript that's injected into the middle of the HTML. It's unobtrusive. The way validation works now in MVC3 is to use a combination of jQuery and what we call the data dash attributes. Data dash attributes are an extensibility mechanism that have been introduced into the HTML specifications that essentially allow you to define custom data attributes. That is, any browser that comes along and sees something that is a data dash attribute should ignore that attribute and consider it to be some sort of private storage for the application, something that's going to be interpreted by the application script running on the page. It doesn't impact the rendering at all. So when you see data-val equals true, data-val equal to, this is all legal HTML. It's going to work cross-browser. And what the validation scripts will do, the jQuery.validate and the jQuery.validate.unobtrusive, they'll come through and pull the information from these data- attributes to figure out what needs validated. For instance, data-val equals true says that this input needs some validation. It's going to have an equal to validation. You can see here's the error message that's going to be displayed, and here is the other field that it's going to look for. And so if we come into the create view, and I change the number of hours, then you can see we get the message, confirm hours and hours do not match. I could also set hours to 0, and I see that this should be between 1 and 20. As soon as I enter something, the validation error message goes away, and this is the behavior we expect with client-side validation. I also want to point out two more things. First of all, the unobtrusive JavaScript is also, when you enable that, it also works for things like the HTML helpers that produce asynchronous action links and asynchronous forms. So with that flag enabled, MVC no longer injects JavaScript into any of your views. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that if you have one of these features enabled or disabled and you want to change that just inside of one view, there are HTML helpers that allow you to selectively enable or disable both client validation and unobtrusive JavaScript.